Use the Force. What? This is so cool. Check these lightsabers out. They even spark when they clash. They've got sound effects. They close, they open. Oh my goodness, you can throw them and use the Force to return them. Look at that. That is incredible. And not only do they allow you to have these cool battles, but they also affect your health. So if you accidentally cut yourself, you can see my health is going down. This is crazy. Look at that. That's so cool. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're going to go through a pretty simple script. I've added a lot of extra features in here. So if we want to just dive in one person with me, we're going to go ahead and show you how this works. You grab your saber handle, and then when you pull down on the trigger, yep, there you go. So now we've got two lightsabers and we can clash them together. And it has sparks going off. More interestingly, the sparks actually follow the lightsaber, which is pretty cool. And then when you let go, it shrinks, has a little sound effect. It's pretty neat. The other cool feature I've put in is if you throw it, and then you put your hand out isn't actually important, but it'll return to your hand, and that's kind of cool. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at how this works. I'm going to quickly stop the world. So by stopping the world, it shows all the objects in their full without the scripts affecting them. I'd like to start by describing what we have in this object, like what makes this possible. So the first thing you're going to notice is we have our lightsaber handle. We also have our lightsaber itself, that's the red part. And then coming down the bottom, you'll notice there's an invisible lightsaber. This is just a duplicate of our red one coming out the bottom of the handle. And so what this does is it gives our center point right here in the center. And then what we're doing is scaling it down to almost 0 and then scaling it back up to full length. And so by doing that, we can retract it and expand it. This bottom piece is non-collidable and non-visible. We've also got quite a few sound effects. So the two sound effects down here are just like anchored in place. They're the opening and closing sound effects. I recorded these with my voice, but I find there's a bit of a delay in them, even though I tried to record them without delay. I'd recommend using an actual sound effect from the Horizon library. And then up here, we've got another sound effect as well as the visual effect. Now these two, they actually teleport to all of these triggers. So these triggers represent collision points. Anywhere that you collide with another lightsaber, this makes the visual effect go off and the sound go off. And it was kind of an accident, but a happy accident, that when the lightsaber expands, it sets off all the triggers, causing all of these sound effects and the visual effects to go off, which is pretty cool. And then when you collide, it also has the little sparks coming off. We've just kind of aligned them in a row. These triggers are set to object. So if we open up the properties, what you're going to see is that this trigger is set to go off on objects tagged saber. And so then we've attached the script FX trigger. And by attaching it with these sparks and clash sounds, by attaching this, when we go in and duplicate it, it actually saves all of those attributes, meaning the script and these effects, so that it's tied into every single one of these, and they're all using the same sound effect and visual effect, which is actually really cool. The other thing that you'll note in here, that if we go into the lightsaber itself, so the red part, you'll notice that under attributes, it is saber. It says saber at the top. The other important thing to note about the attributes of the saber is the scale, the saber object. So when you create the grouping of the two objects, it is automatically set to be 1, 1, 1. But if you change the scale of the saber itself to be any less than this, and so the two pieces are scaled, then the script won't be nearly as easy. So I highly recommend leaving it at 1. And if you need to adjust the scale of the saber itself, what you can do is if you go outside of the object and you're looking here at this object properties, you can scale the entire handle and the saber itself, and that will give you, like I have it at 70% right now. The other alternative is that if you go inside of the two-part object, so the top and bottom part of the saber, you can extend it or shrink it and grow it without affecting the 1, 1, 1 setting. But if you're going to do that, I highly recommend ungrouping the two objects and then making it the right size and then duplicating it again and recreating it. And the reason I recommend that is so that they're identical. If they're off by just a little bit, it's not going to look nearly as clean. We're going to look at one more object, which is our entire group. So the entire grouped objects, this is like the handle, And on the handle, you'll see that it's set to visible, it's collidable, the interactivity is set to grabbable and physics. We've also got gravity turned on with it defaulting to metal. We've set the saber to be the red object, so we've tied it into the 2-part saber. Then set the open speed so it goes out at 0.75 seconds and the retract speed to half a second. And those can be set from inside of our script or inside of each saber, so every single saber could have different properties. Opening sound effects linked in and the closing sound effects sound linked in. Those are the two at the bottom. And then we've got return time set to 3 seconds and return to hand set to 2 seconds. And so what this is when you throw it, it's going to wait 3 seconds before it starts to return, and then it's going to take 2 seconds to return to your hand. So you could also set that to be different for each different type of lightsaber. So going into our script, so starting at the top, when world is started, we scale to 0.01, 0.01, 0.01 on saber. You cannot go any smaller than 0.01, and this is the main reason I recommend you set it to 111 and nothing less, because if you scale this by multiplying it to 0.01, anything less than 0.01 is actually going to cause some issues inside of Horizon's code. And so by setting and making sure that the initial object you're working with is 1 and scaling specifically to the vector of 0.01, it alleviates any issues you could have. And then we do that on the saber object. Then when event index trigger is pressed by the player, we scale to 111, so that's full 100% scale. And that's over the open speed, so that's that speed that we set of 0.75 seconds. And we do that on the saber, and we play the open sound effect. Then, when index trigger is released, we let go. We then scale back to 0.01, and we do that with a retract speed on saber, and we play the sound close sound effect. Now, it is possible to put these into if statements. So for instance, if you don't want to use trigger, like a lot of people just press it instinctively and they don't hold it, you can use an if statement with a Boolean. And then if it's on, you could note that. And when it's off and it's pressed again, then it would close it. And so that's pretty easy to do. In fact, I think we'll make that change real quick just to show you what that looks like. So we grab an if statement here, and then we grab another if statement here, and then we drag these, indent them, and we grab these and indent them here. So we no longer use the trigger up. And then we create a new variable. So if you go to the variables tab real quick, we're going to create a new variable, which will be a Boolean, and we're going to name this isOpen, and it'll start by being false. And what we're going to do is check this. So if we go to our logic tab and grab the equals sign, we'll run if, and then we'll grab another equals, and we'll grab the isOpen Boolean, and there we go. And so what we want to do is check to see whether it's false or true. So if you go to your values tab and scroll down, you can grab a Boolean and drag that over, and we'll grab that and drag this over here. And so we only want to scale it to 0.01 when it is open, and we only want to open it when it is closed. And so we set that to false and this one to true. And then the next thing we need to do is under our values tab, you'll see the set2 right here. We grab the set2, and then we just need to set that value so that it changes every single time. Now the issue, and you might think, oh, this makes sense, but if you run this in this order, it's going to cause the second one to go off. So we actually need to do the set2 command in a separate event. And so if we go to our events tab and scroll down to the bottom, we can send event with delay, and then we will send the set event with a 1 second delay. So that way it happens afterward. And we'll call this custom set true, and we'll call this one custom set false. All right, then we'll scroll back to the top, grab when event is received, place that underneath, grab when event is received, place that underneath as well, and then we'll scroll down just a hair, and then we can grab the set and move that down into the bottom my event, and then grab the other and pull that down into the next bottom event. And then we just need to label this correctly. So we'll label this one set true, and we'll label this one set false. There we go. And then we just need to go ahead and grab those variables. So we're going to be setting the isOpen Boolean, and we're going to set that to Boolean true and Boolean false. There we go. So now this will only work when you press the button, and then when you let go, it'll stay open until you press the button again. And so you could actually throw it with the blade out, which might be something you actually want to happen. Otherwise, you can revert it to the previous way, which is not very difficult to do either. That's how that works. So here at the top, When event grab ends with player, we set the player ID in motion. This is currently an empty player ID variable, and we set that to the current player. We then send event return to self after return time. That's how long do we want to wait for it to be thrown and then come back. We then set, under event return, we set simulated to false on full object itself. This basically stops it from moving any further. We then set simulated to true again because we want it to still move. We then turn gravity off because we want this to move with the force, which doesn't have gravity. We then move to the right hand of the player ID that we set previously, and we return to that hand over that 2-second variable that we set, and we do that on the full object, so that's object self. Then we enable gravity after it's returned to hand. So after the same amount of time that it takes to return to the hand, we then re-enable gravity. So it'll come to your hand and then drop to the floor if you don't grab it.
If we wanted to, could we move that set gravity up to when event is, so that way when we throw it, there's no gravity, and it's almost like it will glide. You know when you get like a force throw of a lightsaber and it just glides through.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that actually. So we'll grab set gravity to false when grab ends. And so now that we've moved it up there, it should do exactly that.
I'm just trying to understand how it works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for asking.
Okay.
After we've enabled gravity, we need to know that when the grab starts, so when you re-grab the object, we don't want it to return to the hand. And so we stop sending this event. That does have the one downside that when grab starts, we do need to re-enable gravity because we're sending gravity up here. And so, yeah, that happens before return. So what we need to do is under grab start, we need to add the event set gravity back to true, just in case we don't go through the full routine. And you'll note it's important that we can't just move enable gravity down here, because if we moved this down to the grab start, if someone didn't re-grab the lightsaber, it would float off into the distance and you'd lose the object.
It's like a safety net, right? We're putting it in twice just in case.
Yep, exactly. And that is our lightsaber. So there's a lot of code in here, but most of it's very simple code. It's more just about having a lot of really neat features on one object. The only other thing we need to look at is our FX trigger script. And so this is the script that runs on the trigger. You'll note that when the trigger is entered with an object, we then move to the position of self. So we move to the trigger that had this trigger being entered by an object. We move to that position on the visual effect and the sound effect. We then play the visual effect and we stop the sound effect. So if it was already playing, we stop it and then we play the sound effect. So that allows it to start from the beginning. Pretty straightforward. Any questions? Awesome. Oh, you just grabbed the duplicate tool. Nice. For everyone watching, if you grab the hand tool, pick up, and then click to the duplicate tool, it will duplicate. It takes a second for the gravity to disable. Oh, there we go. So let me try again. And you kind of have to throw it up a little bit higher. This might actually be the most advanced sabers in Horizon.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I'd like to know if anybody has made one more advanced than this.
I'll tell you right now, Lex.
Well, the ones
you have inspired me. Once I've done this, or once this is done, I'm going to make all these lightsabers work like this. And then I think I'm going to try and modify the trigger, so if I hit you as a player,
yeah,
like you return to another location.
Yeah.
And then I'll just make battlegrounds.
Yeah, super easy. I can import it into here right now so you guys have access to it. So our player health master controller, if you look right here, when the player enters the world, we set their health, which is a global variable. Go down to the settings icon, you'll see player variables. Now you're not able to create one here, but I'm gonna go ahead and create the health variable since it doesn't exist yet. And now I've created health. Save. Okay, so now we have a health variable. And now when players enter the world, we set their health variable because each player will have one of these. It's tied to each individual player. And that will set the players to have max health for that player. And the player's max health is 10 at this point. And then when player hit is received for the player ID, we then, if the number is less than 1, we get their player's health to check that. And then we respawn that player to the respawn point, and we set their health back to max health. But if it's more than 1, so if it's 2 through 10, we then set their health to be health minus what it's currently at, so -1, and then we update it. Now if we go to our sword, actually go in here as players and try these swords out. And so if you want to grab one, and then I'll just hit me in the face, you'll notice a health appears. Apparently it's 20. But as you hit me, yeah, I don't think that one actually works yet, but hit me in the head. Yeah, you'll see the health appears. So as you hit, the health appears and it shows a number, and then you can even hit yourself. On our sword, we're running a very simple code as well, and it's more or less right here. You can see when the world is started, we hide the text object. When event trigger exits with player, so once we've hit the player, we don't trigger until the sword leaves the player. And then we cancel sending my event, which prevents the hit from occurring too often. And then we set player ID to be player. We then send move to position of self on text. So we move to the position of the trigger on the text object. We then show the text object, and then we display the user's health on that text object. So then we show what is the health. We then send my event to self with 1 second delay. My event will send player hit to the health control with a player ID and hide text. And so we tag into our master control script. And if we go into our master control, you'll see that when player hit is received with a player ID, that's when we run all this if statements. You basically just grab this trigger that's at the top of the sword. You just add that single trigger. Master control is an object that runs all of the events. By the way, if you use your cursor and you hit the plus button to the right, you can select multiple objects really easily. So we're going to then go and add that to each of ours, just right onto the top. Okay, so I've attached the respawn point, so that's in. We've got player health set to 10, so that's good. My trigger, and then attach sword trigger. And then you're going to need to create a text object. In our text object, we'll grab a gizmo text and scale it to whatever size you'd like, and then type in 0 for default and set it as default visible. Then grab color, and I use the color red because I thought that looked pretty good. Dark red actually looks better. There we go. Once you've linked in all of these things, we then need to bring our trigger into the lightsaber. Make sure to make the trigger the length of the saber or wherever you'd like to count as a player hit. We do need to be careful with this because we need to also add a disable and enable, because with normal swords, they don't need to disable the trigger. But in this case, we do need to enable it and disable it, so there's a safety time period. And I wouldn't make it too close to the hilt, so that way the player's not accidentally taking their own health. Add that, bring it inside, let go, exit. So we'll want to go to our script. Under my Saber Script or your Saber Script, you're going to want to add the enable and disable code underneath each if statement. Underneath play sound on, sound effects on, and stop sound, sound effects on. Under each of those, we want to add the enable on the first one and disable on the second one. But we're not disabling self. We need to create a new variable object, player hit trigger. And then we'll drag that in onto the enable and disable. And then we just need to go tie that into our object. So open up the Saber properties panel. You'll see there's a new area for a trigger to be tied in. And so go into our object, open up the properties panel for that trigger, and then grab the reference cable and connect it.
You don't know the power of the dark side.
This is actually intense. And so if we disable it, now we can see we're not taking health damage.
I just saw 9.
I just saw 7.
You can throw the lightsaber. Are you ready?
Yes, it works.
Yeah.
Oh, and then it's going to come back to me. And it'll hit. Oh, it hit you twice. Oh, and I dodged it. Oh, sweet.
Do you now see how we have the best mechanic for any game ever?
We need to disable the object at the beginning of the world. So if you go into your Saber Script, on world start, we need to add another disable object line for that trigger that we just created. So go to the Actions tab, grab Disable Object, put that underneath this scale, and then grab the new trigger and put that under there. So now it should say Action Scale with Vector 010101 on Saber, and then Disable Player Hit Trigger.
I'm starting to understand the logic of all this.
Good. I mean, you've had the crash course of all crash courses today.
But honestly, I think this is like you should learn. You know, choose something you want to build. Someone comes and helps you.
Yeah. Did you just...
Oh no!
Where did you...
That's the main thing. I think you gotta build something you really are passionate about. If you're gonna put the time into it, then it's like fun.
Yeah.
Complex questions.
That is so freaky watching that come out of my chest.
And then open up the world you want to import. So say you click on Lightsaber Script, then you hit the 3 dot icon, and then it'll say import world. You can only do that from the world that you want to import into. Obviously you can't import the world that we're in into itself. But yeah, you could import these. I'd recommend duplicating it. I'm not sure if you can duplicate it, so maybe import into an empty world and then clear out everything you don't need. But when you import everything, it could break your world pretty quick. So I definitely recommend importing into empty world, get just 1 or 2 items or whatever you want to keep, and then delete the rest.
I think we're done with the
want
lightsabers
you
now,
to-
yeah? Like,
Yeah,
we're
we've done
happy with them?
amazing. Great job, you guys. I just want to close by saying thank you all for showing up and checking this out. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate
that's
to
awesome.
ask.